a day the world stood still, the day one of the worst terror attacks to ever take place on American soil shook us all to our cores. John Howard was Australia's Prime Minister at the time and was actually in Washington, D.C. when the events of September 11 took place. He quickly pledged our support to the United States and went on to send Australian troops into the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. I spoke to the former PM about his memories of that fateful day and the 2 decades that have passed since.
It's got to be a terrorist attack, and I saw the plane hit the building.
All sides of politics all around the world changed a little that day.
What has to be remembered is that the greatest fear was that that attack had been the beginning of a series of attacks. People were saying, will the next attack be London or Tokyo, in Sydney? It's important all these years afterwards to remember how people felt at the time, because this came from nowhere and it shocked everybody. It was so audacious and it was so effective in its audacity.
The World Trade Center, tower number 1 is on fire.
Oh my God! Oh my God! It's terrorist! Guys, what do we do?
I wonder if you could take me back to that day, your most immediate thoughts.
Well, I, like everybody else, was shocked. I'd been for a morning walk. I'd been briefed by my press secretary about an upcoming news conference, and at the end of it he said, oh, by the way, there's been a bad accident in New York. A plane has hit one of the twin towers of the Trade Center. I thought, gee, that's a terrible accident. Quarter of an hour later he was banged on my door and said, the other tower's been hit by another plane. This isn't an accident.
Could I just say before I start on any domestic things how horrified I am at what I've just heard regarding what's happened in New York.
And while we were having the news conference, the plane hit the Pentagon. And after the news conference was over, we pulled up the blinds and you could see the smoke rising from the Pentagon. My immediate thought was for my wife and eldest son, Tim, who'd gone on a bit of early morning sightseeing, and they wanted to go to the Pentagon just to look at it, but they were okay. And the head of my American Secret Service detail, George Edward, said to me, you're out of here, Prime Minister. I haven't lost anybody yet, and I don't intend to start today. And we were sent to a bunker under the Australian Embassy in Washington. Everybody was just stunned, the audacity of it. The attack was a bigger assault on American sovereignty than Pearl Harbor had been. The next day, I had been scheduled to address a joint sitting of Congress to mark the 50th anniversary of the ANZUS Treaty. I naturally couldn't go ahead with that, but I nonetheless went there. I wanted to be in the gallery. I was given a standing ovation by the joint sitting. It was very moving. And it was just a way of saying we're your friend and we're by your side.
Given what happened afterwards and our response internationally with Iraq and Afghanistan, do you have any regrets at all?
Well, I certainly had no regrets about committing our forces to help the United States root out al-Qaeda. It was the right thing to do, and it had overwhelming support in Australia. I know the mission in Iraq was more controversial. It was something that divided the Australian community. It was opposed by the Labor Party. My response to them was that the greatest concern the Americans and I and others had, and the British government then led by Tony Blair, was that if Saddam Hussein did have weapons of mass destruction, he could easily hand those to terrorists.
I want to ask you about Afghanistan, given what's happening, which is horrendous. Do you worry that sometime soon the terrorists will return and that we may face another September 11 because we're no longer there?
Terrorism has never gone. It's an ever-present threat. The best weapon we have against terrorism is timely intelligence. As far as a repetition of September 11 is concerned, on the available information, I don't think al-Qaeda has the capacity for that now, but what could happen now that there is no longer an American or a NATO or Australian or whatever combination of presences in Afghanistan, it might regenerate. But as to what develops in the future, it's far more in the lap of the gods now than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
Are the criticisms of Joe Biden, and they seem to be intensifying, credible?
Both sides of politics in America had decided to pull out of Afghanistan. And Donald Trump, as president, made, I think, a serious mistake in announcing that America was going before he actually negotiated the terms of the departure now. But I do think that the manner of the final departure of the Americans was embarrassing. And they did, of course, organise a wonderful evacuation of over 120,000 people, but the symbol of disorder and chaos is not good for American prestige.
What does September 11 mean to former Prime Minister John Howard?
Well, it's just one of those days I'll never forget. But it was a reminder that there's enormous merit in that great motto of the RSL, that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And it does mean that you have to work hard on keeping your alliance, so you have to work hard on preserving freedoms within our own country.
20 years ago, Australians closed their eyes, believing they were safe. But while we slept, the world changed.
On the morning of September 12, 2001, Australia woke to news the most powerful country on the planet had been brought to its knees. 102 unbelievable minutes unfolding before our very eyes. It was the dead of night in Australia, but the US was suffering its darkest day. What we were seeing just couldn't be real. Tragically, it was all terribly true, and Australia was about to wake up to it.
It is, to say the least, it has been an extraordinary chain of events overnight.
Then Today host Steve Liebman was on air that morning and brought us the news we might not have believed if we weren't watching along with him.
Australians are waking up to the news of what has happened these past 7 hours in the United States.
Steve, I remember the first plane hit at 11:15 at night. You, I imagine, were sound asleep. How did you find out what had happened?
I was about to go to bed, Ali, and I had CNN on in the background, and the first plane had gone in just short of 11 o'clock at night our time, and I guess like everybody else who was watching, you sort of didn't know what was going on. And then all of a sudden, the top of the World Tower starts crumbling away, falling away, and just crashing down onto the streets of Manhattan.
And you see those pictures of the streets, and it's just...
Looks like it's been hit by a snowstorm. You're on autopilot. Your duty is tell the story. As you get the details, as somebody gives you more information, as you see something more on your computer, just tell the story. And try to stay as calm as you could, given the enormity of what was happening in front of us. Nine Network's correspondent Michael Usher is in the Big Apple. Michael, America really is at war.
Yeah, Steve, it's just extraordinary.
Reporting live from Ground Zero, then 9 US correspondent Michael Usher, with cameraman Andy Felton. Lens trained on the tragedy.
That plume of smoke is still burning.
You were in New York City with Michael Usher covering the US Open. Where were you and how did you find out that the towers had been hit?
Well, we were sitting on the plane already at LaGuardia, and he got a call from his wife, who just happened to be up watching back in LA, saw the first report of a plane going into the building. Luckily, the doors hadn't shut yet on the plane, so we actually just got up and left.
You can probably see all the smoke still burning there, Steve. They're trying to get to some of those areas, still see who might still be alive under all of that mess and chaos.
And it was extremely scary because there's, like F-16s or whatever they were, buzzing around New York. The streets were totally empty. It was like a movie. No one around. Dust, was about an inch of dust everywhere.
This has just come in from the United States, shot by an amateur cameraman in Manhattan.
There was so many people with dust on their faces, and I do remember them just sort of walking. It was like they were walking around in circles, not knowing what to do. I remember looking at all the faces on the wall. So, these are all people that are under that rubble.
I remember that broadcast very clearly because I was a brand new journalist to the newsroom, so I was behind the scenes where all the chaos was.
Yeah.
And I remember watching you, and I wondered at one point, like, what were you feeling within yourself, and did you feel that responsibility to remain calm for the nation?
There was another story unfolding that nobody at the time really knew about, and that was I have a sister who has lived in New York for almost 40 years now, in Manhattan. And I was frantically trying to get in touch with her in those rare moments when I wasn't actually on air in front of the camera. And when I was on air bringing people the story, there was someone in the Channel 9 control room trying to find her. And that was rather a nerve-wracking experience until somebody got my earpiece and said, "We've got her."
My sister Wendy, who I believe we have on the line now. Can you hear me, sis?
I can, Steve. How are you?
I'm fine. Where are you?
I'm at home now on 42nd Street.
Glad to know you're alive and well.
So more than 20 years anchoring the Today Show. Where does September sit?
In terms of enormity, right at the very top. I mean, I remember Port Arthur. Where were you when Diana died in the tunnel in Paris? The other extreme, being on air when we won the America's Cup in 1983. But this 9/11, that's one I'll never forget. It's not until you finish whatever it is you're doing on air and you sort of leave the studio or leave the location and you have time to reflect on what it is you've been doing and what it is you've been reporting on for those hours or days or whatever. That's when you have a delayed reaction. You sort of look back and think, my God, look what man has done to himself and others.
Oh, it was wonderful to have a chat there with Andy and also to Lebo.
Great broadcaster, Lebo.
You know, I mean, I
Terrific.
was brand new to the newsroom. My very first job, I was 21, and when that happened, and just watching him remain so calm when we're all behind the scenes, like, what's going on? It was so chaotic, and you just felt in that moment that the world had changed.
So I was in Cairns, and my grandmother woke me up. And she said, there's a rude man on the phone from Channel 9 in Brisbane who wants you to come to the phone. And I was like, oh, what's going on? And she said it might have something to do with the plane going into the building in New York. Oh. And I got on the phone and literally turned around and the second plane went into the building, right? Then I had to go to Port Douglas because former President Bill Clinton was in Port Douglas. Wow. And they flew in all these Hercules to get him out, and it was just a huge 24 hours. But just seeing Bill Clinton there and seeing it all unfold was something I will never forget. Just that feeling, you know.
I was second year university at CSU Bathurst,
Yeah.
Central West of New South Wales. Got home quite late. I think I was from the pub. And chucked on the TV, and there it is. Rang Mum. Mum, are you seeing what I'm seeing? This is unbelievable. But I tell you what, there's footage there that you see of that second plane going into the building. That was actually captured by a French documentary crew that were filming with an American fire brigade, and they were just sort of fly on the wall. They were doing a little documentary on these guys, and what a time to be filming with those guys, because they're looking up. And there it is. It just hit.
And a lot of those firefighters they were filming with died.
Passed away.
Yeah.
Just
Awful,
yeah.
awful.
What a time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Awful.